a pie, a porch, a boy who had learned to sleep sitting up, a rancher who had stopped setting a second place at the table and told himself it was because he only needed one, a door that was never locked, a woman who had not asked for anything in longer than she could clearly remember, and who would not have known how to begin. These are small things. I know they look like small things. A door, a pie, a pew in a cold church on a Tuesday night in November. But I have told enough stories in my time to know that the small things are almost always the whole story, and that the big things, the declarations, the ceremonies, the moments people think will change everything, those are just the small things, finally recognized for what they were. This is a story about a man who thought he had already used up his portion of good fortune, who had done the arithmetic on his life with the careful, methodical precision he applied to everything else, and arrived at an answer that was wrong. Not dishonest, not self-pitying, just wrong. The way a man can be wrong when he uses the right method on the wrong question. It starts in a church, on a Tuesday, in November, in a year when the first snow came 3 weeks early and nobody was ready for it. Elias Croft was not a man who went looking for things to fix. He was 51 years old, and he had learned, or believed he had learned, the difference between a problem that required his attention and a situation that simply was what it was and deserved to be left alone. He ran 400 acres of cattle land outside a town called Harlan's Creek, which sat in a valley between two mountain ranges that the locals had long since stopped naming in full and referred to simply as the near side and the far. He had a dog named Cobb who had opinions about weather and strangers, and expressed both with equal conviction. He had a housekeeper, Mrs. Pell, who came Mondays and Thursdays and left covered dishes in the icebox and did not stay to talk, which suited them both. He had a neighbor, Frank Aldridge, who was the closest thing he had to a friend and who had been telling him for 2 years that he was going to die alone, surrounded by cattle, and that this was, in Frank's considered opinion, a waste of a perfectly good man. Elias did not disagree, exactly. He just didn't see what was to be done about it. His wife, Nora, had died 6 years before. Not suddenly, not in the dramatic way that leaves a person stunned and disbelieving, but slowly, over 14 months, in the way that teaches a person every single day how to lose the same thing again. He had been present for all of it. He did not regret being present. He had held her hand and read to her and kept the ranch running because she had asked him to. Because she had said, "Elias, don't let the place go to pieces on my account." And he had said, "I won't." And he had kept that promise the way he kept all his promises, which was completely and without complaint. When she was gone, he had buried her in the churchyard at Harlan's Creek, and he had come home, and he had set about the business of living in the way a man does when he has decided that living is a duty rather than a pleasure. He ate, he worked, he spoke when spoken to. He told himself this was enough. He told himself he was content. He told himself, with the particular conviction of a man who has thought something so many times it has worn a groove in his mind, that a man of his age and his particular history was not the kind of man who got to have more than this, and that wanting more was a form of ingratitude for what he had already been given. He was wrong. He knew it the way you know a boot is on the wrong foot. Not immediately, not consciously, but somewhere in the body, somewhere that doesn't use words. The night he found Clara Marsh and her son sleeping in the church pew, it was 11:30 on a Tuesday in November, and he had gone to the church for the same reason he went every Tuesday night, which was to check that the wood stove in the vestibule had been properly banked, because Pastor Hale was a distracted man who loved his congregation and forgot about fire safety with a regularity that Elias had decided, some years ago, was simply a permanent feature of the situation. It was not his job. No one had asked him to do it. He had simply noticed that it needed doing, and he was the kind of man who did things that needed doing, and so he did it. He pushed open the side door of the church, and the warmth of the stove met him, and he saw them. The woman was asleep in the third pew from the back, on the left side, which was the side closest to the stove. She was perhaps 35, though cold and exhaustion have a way of adding years to a face, so he could not be certain. She was wearing a coat that had been good once and had been made to last past its natural life through a combination of careful mending and determination. She had her arm around a boy who looked to be about 7 or 8, who was sleeping with his head on her lap and his feet curled up on the pew, and who had, Elias noticed, a small worn-out hat still on his head, the way children keep hats on when they are not sure where they are and want to hold on to something familiar. Cobb, who had come with him, sat down immediately and looked at Elias with the expression he reserved for situations he considered Elias's problem to solve. Elias stood in the doorway for a moment. He was not a man given to quick decisions in situations that required care. He looked at the woman and the boy, and he looked at the stove, which was in fact banked correctly for once, and he looked at Cobb, who had now lain down in a manner that communicated he was prepared to wait. The woman opened her eyes. She did not startle. That was the first thing he noticed. She came awake the way a person does when they have been sleeping lightly for a long time, always half listening, always ready. She looked at him, and she did not look afraid, exactly, but she looked the way a person looks when they have already decided that whatever happens next, they will manage it. There was a steadiness in her face that he recognized without being able to name where he recognized it from. He said, "I'm sorry to disturb you. I was just checking the stove." She said, "I know. I heard you come in last Tuesday too." He had not known she was there last Tuesday. He stood with that information for a moment. She said, "We won't be any trouble. We'll be gone before the morning service." He said, "Where will you go?" It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, asked in the plain way he asked all genuine questions, and she seemed to understand that, because she did not get defensive. She looked at him for a moment, and then she looked at the boy, and then she said, "We'll figure something out." He thought about that. He thought about the temperature outside, which was 17 degrees, and the snow that was still coming down, and the coat that had been good once. He thought about the boy's hat. He thought about the particular quality of her answer, which was not a lie and not a plan. It was a refusal to burden a stranger, which he recognized as a form of dignity that cost something to maintain. He said, "I have a bunkhouse. It's heated. There's nobody in it." She looked at him. He said, "I'm not. I'm just saying it's there. You don't have to," she said. "Why would you offer that to someone you don't know?" He said, "Because it's cold, and because the stove in here won't last until morning." She was quiet for a moment. The boy shifted in his sleep and made a small sound and settled again, and she put her hand on his back without looking down, automatic and certain, the way you do a thing you have done 10,000 times. She said, "My name is Clara Marsh. This is my son Henry," he said, "Elias Croft. I have a ranch about a mile out." She said, "All right, Mr. Croft. We'll take the bunkhouse and I'll work for it." He said, "You don't have to work for it." She said, "I know I don't have to. I'm telling you I will." He looked at her. She looked at him. Cobb, from his position on the floor, appeared to be following this exchange with professional interest. Elias said, "All right." That was how it started, not with a grand gesture, not with a declaration, with a cold night and a stove that needed checking, and a woman who would not accept something she couldn't earn, and a man who recognized that particular form of pride because he had it himself. He drove them out to the ranch in the wagon, the boy asleep across Clara's lap the whole way, and he showed her the bunkhouse, which was small and clean and had a stove of its own, and he lit it, and he left them a lamp, and he said, "There's food in the main house if you need it." And she said, "We're fine." And he said, "All right." And he went inside. He stood in his kitchen for a while, in the dark, not turning on the lamp. Cobb came and sat beside him. He thought about the woman's face, the way she had come awake, the way she had said, "I'll work for it," with a steadiness that was not pride exactly, or not only pride, but something more like self-respect held onto through a long time of things being hard. He thought about the boy's hat. He thought about the fact that she had heard him come in last Tuesday and had said nothing, had simply stayed quiet, and hoped he would not make it into a situation, and he had not known she was there, and that thought sat in him in a way he could not quite account for. He told himself he was just doing what any decent person would do. Cobb looked at him with the expression that meant he found this explanation insufficient. Elias went to bed. In the morning he came out to find that Clara had already been up for at least an hour. She had found the woodpile and split enough for 3 days and stacked it against the bunkhouse wall with a precision that told him she had done it before. The boy, Henry, was sitting on the bunkhouse step eating a piece of bread that she must have found somewhere, wearing his hat, watching Cobb with the careful attention of a child who wanted very much to pet a dog and was not sure of the protocol. Cobb, for his part, had already made his decision. He was sitting approximately 6 inches from Henry's knee and looking elsewhere, which was his method of making himself available without appearing to ask for anything. Elias said good morning. Clara said good morning. Henry said good morning, and then immediately asked if the dog bit, and Elias said no, and Henry reached out and put his hand on Cobb's head with the solemnity of a person completing an important transaction. Clara said, "I can cook, I can mend. I can handle most of what needs doing around a place like this." "I saw your fence line on the east side needs work," Elias said. "It does," she said. "I can do that too, if you show me how you want it done." He looked at her. She was looking at the fence line with a practical, assessing eye, and he had the sudden and slightly disorienting sense that she was not asking for his approval. She was simply telling him what she had observed and what she proposed to do about it. He said, "All right." She stayed. Not permanently, not at first. It was a practical arrangement, clearly stated and clearly understood. She cooked and mended and kept the house in a way that was different from Mrs. Pell's keeping, which had been correct and thorough but impersonal, the way a well-run institution is impersonal. Clara's keeping was purposeful. She noticed what was needed and addressed it without being asked, and she had opinions about how things should be done, and she expressed those opinions plainly and without apology. And when Elias disagreed, she listened to his reasoning, and either revised her position or explained why she didn't, and either way it was done, and they moved on. He had not had a conversation like that in 6 years. He had not realized he had missed it. Henry was in school by the second week, which Clara had arranged herself, appearing at the schoolhouse door with the boy and his hat and a letter she had written explaining his situation to the teacher, Miss Aldridge, Frank's younger sister, who had been teaching in Harlan's Creek for 12 years and who had, by all accounts, a gift for children who had been made quiet by difficult circumstances. Henry came home from his first day and said that there were 17 children and that 2 of them had been mean and 1 of them had been very mean, and that Miss Aldridge had handled all of it without raising her voice, which Henry found impressive. Clara said, "Good." Elias said, "Miss Aldridge is good at her work," Henry said. "She said I could bring Cobb to school on Friday for the other children to meet him." And both Elias and Clara looked at Cobb, who was sitting by the fire with the expression of a dog who had already decided he was willing to be an educational resource. This was the rhythm of those first weeks, small and domestic and unremarkable, except that Elias noticed, with the methodical attention he gave to most things, that the house felt different. Not louder, exactly. Clara was not a loud woman, and Henry was a quiet child, but inhabited in a way it had not been for a long time. The kitchen smelled like food being cooked rather than food being reheated. There were boots by the door that were not his boots. There was, on the windowsill above the sink, a small smooth stone that Henry had brought in from the yard and placed there for reasons he had not explained, and which no one had asked him to explain. Elias looked at that stone sometimes when he was washing up. He did not examine why. By December, the arrangement had settled into something that had its own shape and its own rules, most of which had never been stated aloud. He did not ask about Henry's father, because she had not offered and he knew better than to press. She did not ask about Nora, though he suspected she had heard something from someone in town, because people in Harlan's Creek were generous with information about their neighbors in a way that was meant kindly and occasionally was. They worked alongside each other with the easy coordination of people who had each spent years doing things alone and had independently developed the same instinct for efficiency and the same distaste for unnecessary conversation. He paid her a fair wage. She accepted it without comment, which he understood to mean she found it fair and not generous, which was what he had intended. Frank Aldridge came for supper in the second week of December and spent the entire meal looking between Elias and Clara, with an expression of suppressed satisfaction that he was not making any effort to suppress. After Clara had taken Henry to the bunkhouse for the night, and Elias and Frank were sitting with their coffee, Frank said, "She's remarkable," Elias said. "She's a good worker," Frank said. Elias said. "She's a good worker, and she's in a difficult situation, and I'm helping her out of it. And that is the entirety of what is happening," Frank said. "You've set a second place at the table." Elias looked at the table. He had, in fact, set a second place. He had been setting a second place for 3 weeks without thinking about it, which was different from not thinking about it. He had been not thinking about it with some deliberateness. He said, "She eats at the table. It would be rude not to set a place," Frank said. "What about Henry?" Elias said. "Henry eats at the table too," Frank said. "So you've set 3 places," Elias said. Frank said, "I'm just observing." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the snow was coming down again, the particular quiet of a heavy snowfall that makes the world feel smaller and more contained. And from somewhere across the yard came the faint light of the bunkhouse window. Frank said, "She's been good for the place." Elias said, "Yes." Frank said, She's been good for you. Elias said, I'm not going to have this conversation. Frank said, you're having it right now. You're just doing the part where you don't say anything and hope I'll stop. Elias said, does that ever work? Frank said, no. And then he finished his coffee and put on his coat and said, she's been here 6 weeks and you haven't locked the door once since the night you brought her in. I noticed that too. He left. Elias sat with the coffee and the fire and the sound of the snow, and he thought about the door. It was true. He had stopped locking it. He had not decided to stop locking it. He had simply, on that first night, left it unlocked in case she needed something, in case the boy needed something, in case the stove in the bunkhouse failed or something went wrong in the night. And then the next night he had not locked it for the same reason. And then the reason had stopped being a reason and had become a habit. And the habit had become something he did not examine. He thought about what that meant. He thought about it for a while, sitting in the kitchen, and then he told himself it didn't mean anything. It was just a practical measure, and he went to bed. He was wrong. He knew it the way you know a boot is on the wrong foot. Now, I want to stop here for a moment because we are right at the place where everything is about to shift, and I want you to know that I see you, wherever you are right now. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're lying in bed, maybe you're doing something that needed doing while you let a story keep you company. Thank you for being here. If this story is sitting with you, if Elias and Clara and that unlocked door have found you somewhere real, I'd be glad to know it. And I'll tell you this much before we go on. Elias is about to figure something out. He's going to take a while about it, because that is who he is, but he's going to get there. Keep listening. Christmas came to Harlan's Creek the way it always did, with a great deal of collective effort and individual opinion. The church was decorated, the school put on a pageant, and the town's various social opinions about various people's business were exchanged with the warmth and efficiency that the season traditionally encouraged. The opinion about Clara Marsh, as Elias understood it from Frank and from the careful way people spoke to him at the feed store, was divided roughly into thirds. 1/3 thought the arrangement was perfectly sensible and spoke well of Elias for providing it. 1/3 thought it was irregular and said so to each other rather than to Elias, which was the Harlan's Creek method of registering disapproval. And 1/3 had already decided how the whole thing was going to end and were simply waiting for the principals to catch up. The third included, Elias suspected, most of the people whose judgment he actually respected. There was also the matter of Gerald Hooper. Gerald Hooper was 44 years old, owned the largest dry goods operation in the county, was a widower of 3 years, and was, by any reasonable assessment, a good man. He was prosperous, steady, well-regarded, and had made it known through the intricate social machinery of a small town that he found Clara Marsh to be a woman of considerable quality, and that he intended to call on her. He had, in fact, called on her twice in December, appearing at the ranch with a formal courtesy that Elias could find no reasonable objection to, and Clara had received him politely and without particular warmth, and Henry had looked at him with the assessing gaze of a child who has learned to take the measure of adults quickly, and Cobb had ignored him completely, which was Cobb's method of delivering a verdict. Elias told himself that Gerald Hooper was a perfectly good option for Clara, and that it was none of his business. He told himself this with increasing frequency through December and into January, which, in his experience, was a sign that a thing was very much his business and he was working hard to avoid knowing it. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Thursday in late January, which was an ordinary Thursday in every respect except that it was the day Elias said something half-joking and Clara answered him in a way that he spent the next 3 weeks thinking about, turning over in his mind the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling its weight and its edges. They had been mending harness at the kitchen table after supper, which was something they had fallen into doing together in the evenings, a practical task that gave their hands something to do while the house was quiet and Henry was asleep. It was comfortable in the way that things become comfortable when they have happened enough times to feel inevitable. And Elias had been thinking, without meaning to think it, that this was the best part of his day, this particular hour, and then he had thought about thinking that and had felt the familiar urge to correct himself, to revise the thought into something more manageable. He said, without quite planning to say it, "You know, Gerald Hooper is a good man." Clara did not look up from the harness. She said, "I know he is." Elias said, "He'd take good care of you." And Henry? Clara said, "I imagine he would." Elias said, "A woman in your situation could do a lot worse." And Clara put down the harness, and she looked at him, and she said, "What situation is that exactly?" He said, "I just mean, you're on your own, And Henry needs, she said. Henry has what he needs. He said, I know, she said. Are you trying to get rid of us, Mr. Croft? He said, No, I'm not trying to. I'm just saying that Gerald Hooper is. She said, I know what Gerald Hooper is, and I know what you're doing. He said, What am I doing? She looked at him for a moment, and then she picked up the harness again, and she said, You're doing arithmetic. And then she said, You should stop that. And she went back to her mending, and the subject was closed. He sat with that for a long time. He sat with it that night, and the next day, and the day after that. He fed the cattle and checked the fence line, and did the 100 tasks that a working ranch requires in January. And underneath all of it, in the part of his mind that did not stop, he turned over what she had said. You're doing arithmetic. He knew what she meant. He was not a slow man, not in the ways that mattered. He was a slow deliberator, which was different. He knew that she had seen exactly what he was doing, which was counting up the reasons why a woman like Clara Marsh would naturally and sensibly choose a man like Gerald Hooper, and using those reasons to make a decision on her behalf before she had made it herself, and presenting that decision to her as concern for her welfare, which was both dishonest and, now that he saw it clearly, a little insulting. He thought about Nora. He thought about her the way he always thought about her, which was with a grief that had become, over 6 years, less like a wound and more like a scar, present, permanent, part of the landscape of him, but no longer the thing that defined the landscape. He thought about what Nora had been like, and what she had thought of him, and what she would have said about all of this. She had been a direct woman, Nora. She had not had patience for self-deception, particularly his. She had told him once, early in their marriage, that the most dangerous thing about him was not his stubbornness, but his tendency to dress stubbornness up as reason, to build a careful, logical case for whatever he had already decided to feel, and then believe the case rather than the feeling. He thought she would have said something about arithmetic. He thought she would have said it with a certain amount of affection and a complete absence of sympathy. He thought about the door, the unlocked door, every night for 2 months, left open because she might need something, because the boy might need something, because, and here was the thing he had been filing away without examining, because he wanted there to be no barrier between where he was and where she was, because even the small mechanical act of turning a lock felt like a closing off he was not willing to make. He thought about the second place at the table. He thought about the stone on the windowsill that Henry had put there, and that he had not moved and did not intend to move. He thought about the evenings mending harness, the best part of his day, the part he had tried to revise into something more manageable. He thought, I have been operating under a set of assumptions that need revision. It took him 3 weeks. Frank would have said it should have taken him 3 days, and Frank would not have been entirely wrong. But Elias was who he was, and he needed to be sure, not in the anxious way of a man who doubts himself, but in the thorough way of a man who, once he commits to something, commits completely and does not revisit the question. He needed to know that what he felt was real and not a convenience, not loneliness mistaken for something more, not gratitude confused with affection. He was sure. He was sure on a Wednesday morning in February, standing in the barn doing nothing in particular, when he heard Clara's voice from the yard talking to Henry about something. He couldn't make out the words, just the sound of her voice, the particular quality of it, the way it moved. And he felt something in his chest that was so straightforwardly, uncomplicated joy, that he could not pretend it was anything else. He was sure, and now he had to do something about it, which was the part he had been dreading, because Elias Croft was not a man who found declarations easy. He was a man who showed things through action, through consistency, through the steady accumulation of small, reliable gestures, and he was aware that this was not always sufficient, that sometimes a person needed to hear a thing said plainly, and that Clara Marsh was specifically the kind of person who would require plainness, who would not accept anything less than the direct truth, and who deserved nothing less. He thought about how to say it for 3 more days. He tried various versions in his mind and discarded them. He considered writing it down and decided that was cowardly. He considered asking Frank for advice and decided that Frank would never let him forget it. He found her in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, which was not the time he had planned, but the time that arrived. Henry was at the Aldrich house for the day, playing with Frank's youngest. Cobb was by the fire. The light was coming through the window the way February light does when there's snow on the ground, bright and cold and very clear. He said, "Clara?" She said, "Yes." He said, "I need to say something and I'd ask you to let me finish before you say anything." She put down what she was doing and turned and looked at him. and she had the particular stillness of a woman who already knows what is coming and is waiting to see how it arrives. He said, "I have been, as you correctly identified, doing arithmetic. I have been calculating the reasons why what I feel is not reasonable or appropriate or fair to you, and I have been presenting those calculations to myself as good sense when they are actually, I think, fear. I am not a young man, and I am not without complications, and I am aware that Gerald Hooper is in many respects a more straightforward proposition. But I have also been leaving the door unlocked every night since November, and I have been setting a place at the table, and I have been, the evenings mending harness. Those are the best part of my day, and I think you know that, and I think you have known it longer than I have, and I think it is past time I said it plainly." He stopped. He said, "I am not asking you to decide anything today. I am just telling you the truth, because you asked me once what situation you were in, and I gave you a foolish answer, and the real answer is that the situation is that I love you, and I have for some time, and I thought you should know it." The kitchen was very quiet. The light was very clear. Clara looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "Elias Croft, I have been waiting for you to figure that out since approximately the 3rd week of December," he said. "December," she said. "I told you to stop doing arithmetic," he said. "You did." She said, "You're very thorough," he said. "I've been told that," she said. "It's not entirely a complaint." He looked at her. She was smiling. The real smile, the full one, the one she kept back most of the time, and it changed her face in a way that made him feel that the 3 weeks had been well spent after all, because this was the thing at the end of them, and it was worth it. He said, "So," she said. "So," he said. "I'd like to court you properly, if you're willing. With Henry's knowledge, and I'd like to ask Henry, actually, if that's all right," she said. "He already likes you better than Gerald Hooper," he said. "Cobb doesn't like Gerald Hooper at all," she said. "Cobb has good judgment," he said. "He does." Cobb, from his position by the fire, appeared to accept this assessment without false modesty. They were married in May, in the church at Harlan's Creek, on a morning when the mountains were very clear and the valley was full of the particular green of early spring, the kind of green that seems almost too bright to be real after a long winter. Henry wore his hat to the ceremony and was persuaded to remove it only for the duration of the vows, and replaced it immediately after, which everyone present found entirely appropriate. Frank Aldridge stood up with Elias and cried, which he denied afterward, and which Elias denied witnessing, and which everyone in Harlan's Creek knew had happened. Gerald Hooper attended and was gracious, as Elias had known he would be, because he was a good man, only a wrong answer. Pastor Hale performed the ceremony and forgot to bank the stove afterward, and Elias checked it on the way out, because some things do not change, and some things do, and knowing the difference is most of the work. The stone on the windowsill stayed where Henry had put it. The door was never locked. They had 12 years together before the world began to change in ways that changed everything, and in those 12 years the ranch became something different from what it had been. Not larger, not more prosperous, though it was both, but fuller, in the way a house is full when it is genuinely inhabited by people who have chosen each other and go on choosing each other in the small daily ways that don't get recorded anywhere but that constitute, in the end, the whole of a life. Henry grew up knowing he was wanted, which is the thing that matters most for a child, and he grew up knowing that a man could be wrong about himself and right about everything that followed, which is a thing that serves a person well. There was a morning, some years in, when Henry was 14 and had grown into a serious, capable young man with his mother's directness and his own particular way of seeing things, when he came into the kitchen and found Elias at the table and said, "You know, Pa, I've been thinking." Elias said, "About what?" Henry said, "About how you almost didn't." Elias said, "Almost didn't what?" Henry said, "You know what?" Elias looked at him. The boy had his hat on the table beside him and was looking at Elias with the clear-eyed assessment of a young man who has been paying attention for a long time and has arrived at a conclusion. Elias said, "Your mother told you about the arithmetic," Henry said. "She told me you needed 3 weeks to figure out something she'd known since December." Elias said, "That's accurate," Henry said. "She said you were doing arithmetic instead of just looking at what was in front of you." Elias said, "That's also accurate," Henry said. "I just think it's funny, is all." Elias said, "It is funny," Henry said. "Also, I'm glad you stopped." Elias said, "So am I." They sat with that for a moment, The way men sit with things that are true and don't need elaborating. And then Henry put his hat on and went out to start the morning work, and Elias sat in the kitchen with his coffee, and the light came through the window, and the stone was on the sill, and the door was unlocked, and everything was exactly as it should be. Now, here is what I want to say to you before we part. Elias Croft was not a foolish man. He was not a fearful man in the ordinary sense. He was a man who had learned to measure things carefully, because careful measurement had served him well in every area of his life, and he had made the error of applying that method to a question it could not answer. He had tried to calculate whether he deserved another chance at happiness, whether the numbers added up, whether a man of his age and his particular history was the kind of man to whom such things were still available. He had run the arithmetic and arrived at no, and he had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost him 3 weeks and almost cost him everything. Here is the grain of truth in his fear. He was right that some things cannot be recovered. He was right that loss leaves marks. He was right that a second chance is not the same as a first one, and that it carries the weight of what came before, and that this is real and matters and should not be dismissed. He was not wrong to feel the weight of it, but he was measuring the wrong thing. He was measuring what he had lost and what remained, and whether the remainder was sufficient, when the question was never about sufficiency. The question was never whether he had enough left to offer. The question was whether he was willing to look at what was in front of him and call it what it was. The question was whether he would stop doing arithmetic and start paying attention. Clara knew. She knew from December. She had put down her harness and looked at him and told him, plainly and without cruelty, that he was doing arithmetic, and she had waited because she was the kind of person who, once she had made up her mind, could wait with patience and without resentment for another person to catch up. She had not pushed. She had not withdrawn. She had simply been present and capable and honest, and she had left the door of the conversation unlocked every single day, and she had waited for him to walk through it. I have told a lot of stories in my time. I have told stories about people who were brave in the obvious ways, who rode into danger, who stood up in public, who refused the easy thing. But the stories that stay with me are the ones like this one, the ones about a different kind of courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that happens in a kitchen on a Saturday morning when a man puts down the arithmetic and says the true thing plainly, out loud, to another person, with no guarantee of how it will be received. Don't let the arithmetic stop you. That is what I want to say to you. Wherever you are, whatever calculation you are running right now, whatever careful, reasonable case you are building for why the thing in front of you is not available to you, is not for you, is something you have already used up your portion of. The arithmetic is not wrong, exactly. The arithmetic is just the wrong method for the right question. The question is not whether you have enough left. The question is whether you are willing to look at what is in front of you and say its name. The door was never locked. That is the whole story, really. A man left a door unlocked because someone might need something in the night, and that small, practical, unceremonious act was the truest thing he did. The thing that said what he could not yet say out loud. The thing that told the truth before he was ready to tell it. And eventually he caught up to his own unlocked door and walked through it, and found that what was on the other side had been waiting for him all along. Don't let the arithmetic stop you. Thank you for spending this time with me, truly. I know there are 1,000 things competing for your attention, and you chose to sit with Elias and Clara and Henry and Cobb in a cold church in November, and I am grateful for that. I hope this story found you at a good moment, or gave you a good moment if you needed one. Take care of the people in your life, leave a few doors unlocked, and I will see you in the next story.